I'm Mark Fentham.
And I'm Graham Nichols.
And I'm Katie Holloway. You are listening to Ordinary. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Should we start off with a game?
Sure.
You love it when I make you do a game, don't you?
Go for it.
Well, we're thinking about lies today because we're on the 9th commandment, so I thought we could play a bit of classic Two Truths and a Lie. Can you delve out my lies?
Ooh.
Okay, so just in case you're not, I'm sure you're familiar, but listeners, I always call you readers. I'm going to say 3 statements, 2 of them are true, 1 of them's a lie, and Graham and Mark have to try and guess which one is the lie. Okay, you ready?
Yeah, ready.
Okay, first statement, my nickname at school was Woody. Second statement, I once got my tongue stuck to a lamppost. And the third one is, there is only one item on my bucket list, and that is to milk a cow. What do you reckon?
I think Woody makes sense.
Yeah.
I can't remember your maiden name, but I think it's something like that. Maybe. So I think Woody will go for as a true. Would you say that, Mark?
Well, I'll bow to your I was going to go for that was the lie, because I could imagine that Katie wants to milk a cow.
Oh, no, I think
You're allowed to choose different answers if
let's
you
go for
disagree.
a lie. That's the lie. That you want to milk a cow. Yeah.
And I'm going for the tongue is the lie. And Woody was a nickname, and you do want to milk a cow.
Are you going with that as well, Mark, or are you going with
No, he's going with the...
I'm going with the cow as a lie.
You think the cow is a lie?
Yeah. I think the tongue on the lamppost is the lie.
Graham is correct. Why would I put my tongue on a lamppost?
Why not?
People have done in cold countries.
Yeah. I have not. Yes.
Well, I think people have. I don't know.
I thought that you wouldn't know what my maiden name was, so Woody would seem a bit more of a random nickname. But yeah, my maiden name was Wood. And
yeah. See, it's in there somewhere in
hey,
my
look
memory.
At that pastoral knowledge of Graham Nichols.
Sometimes it's through ladies who get married. They often have it in their email addresses for a while. Or forever,
I don't think I did.
In some cases.
Probably through some DBS check or something back in the day.
Yeah, or because your mum picked up from Mayflower or something.
Yeah. Oh, all the confidential information.
Well, I just would have known the name.
Disclose where my children went to nursery. So
well, they're not there now, so
they're well beyond that now. And it's quite easy to figure that out based on the...
what's the statute of limitation or something? I'm sure I'm past that.
It's all good.
Don't know.
Question is, though, was it a lie?
Was what a lie?
What you said, was it a lie? Or was it just a game of deception?
What?
What you said.
One of them was a lie.
Yeah, but was it a lie?
What the truth was.
Is it a lie? Or is it just a game of deception?
Am I lying about this? Are they all lies?
No,
definitely not. I've always wanted to milk a cow, but it's the only thing I care enough about to... There we are. Is this you just trying to segue into the episode?
No, I'm just. It's part of the issue is it even a lie? Is that a lie, or is it just a game of deception? What is a lie?
What is a lie?
Yeah.
What is truth?
Right, Pontius Pilate.
That's
him, isn't it?
It is.
In it. What is truth? Yeah, that's a whole other thing. But shall we delve into the 9th commandment? That's probably better than talking about cows and tongues for any longer. So the 9th commandment says, you shall not give false testimony against your neighbour. So can we have, maybe Mark, you could give us like a broad definition of that before we delve into it. What does false testimony mean, maybe to start with?
Well, probably along the line of false witness, particularly in that culture, it would have been significant, therefore of speaking falsely against someone, giving false testimony, particularly I think in the realm of the courts or those kind of arenas. But it probably broadens out into a much wider area of what it is to speak truth in that way.
Yeah. So what do you mean by false testimony, a false witness? Just saying something that's not true?
Correct. Making stuff up, that which is blatantly false. So lots of the Old Testament laws, if you had to have 2 or 3 witnesses. So if you had people who were seeking to deceive, I mean, you see it, don't you? The obvious one the courts when they seek to crucify Christ, have two or three making stuff up. False testimony.
Great. Graham, in this context, who is your neighbour? So it's saying not giving false testimony against your neighbour. So does that mean those who live nearest to you, or what does it mean in terms of this?
Yeah, I think in a way the two kind of overlap in that their neighbours generally were living next to them.
Yeah.
And as the nation developed into a nation that was settled in the land, it was more likely to do with disputes over land and stuff like that. So neighbour did have a kind of more of a geographical sense to it. But of course, the neighbour in the kind of in the Jewish nation is anybody really. But I think practically speaking, you would tend to have been going into disputes against your actual neighbour or an actual relative, something like that. So it would be someone close-ish with proximity to you, which makes sense.
So does that mean it was all right for them to give false testimony against somebody who was a stranger? Is that
and, exploit people? No, I think it sets a principle, as we'll probably get to, really, that that sort of reads across. But just trying to sort of first of all start where they were. I mean, they may have been disputes amongst tribes, or maybe they weren't that close to each other necessarily. But I think kind of where it starts is the disputes that were more localized. But I think the same principle applies to any dispute inquiry that was going on in the nation where they needed to speak the truth, and what they said had to correspond to reality.
Yeah.
So I think neighbour kind of goes broad, but it starts local.
But it doesn't mean everybody's our neighbour. I think that's as in
what do you mean by that?
As in,
what do you mean by that?
Well, because I think otherwise you end up in a position where everybody is our neighbour, which is not the case, because some people are my enemies. So therefore, how I treat and respond to them will be different to my neighbour, and what it means to particularly in the arena of truth, when you start thinking ethically, how that works out. So I'm to treat people respectfully, but actually in the sense of who is my neighbour, I think neighbour at times is, it is to care for those in need, those kind of things, and there are those in proximity, but there are those who are my enemies, who I'm not going to treat I'm going to treat with respect, but there is a distinction, I think, to be made at points.
So you're allowed to give false testimony against your enemies?
Well, I think it depends what you mean by false testimony.
Yeah. Well,
so
what do you mean? You tell me.
But I think that's interesting. You're starting to get into the discussion about what it means, because historically the Reformed Church, has always said, well, it's always about upholding all truth of all time, which of course at the element of it there is an element of truth, but I think you've got to start distinguishing, what happens when you get into those moral situations whereby actually to speak the truth actually causes a greater harm. And is it then wrong to speak truth or not speak truth?
Yeah.
Is it then lie, or is it testimony? Is it something else? And actually, all the way through the scriptures, you see numerous times where enemies are being deceived, and God even sends a lying spirit amongst people to deceive the enemy. So there is concepts within Scripture itself that are saying, actually, there are times where we're doing something different to declaring truth in the way in which we would expect that we think, I think, just straightforwardly.
Well,
I agree with that. We got there rather quickly. I was going for the simple definition, but Mark went straight into the deep, nuanced. But I agree with the general principle. There's a difference between the nation actually and other nations. There was mercy to be shown to other nations, but there was also a whole conquest that was going to go on. So there was a different relationship. Having had to preach as Mark has, the tricky passages where somebody or other lies in the Old Testament, particularly, you have to kind of figure out what are they doing. And I think I've always landed on there's the kind of more harms thing, but there's also an argument to do with whether someone deserves the truth. Because of the context in which they're in as an enemy and opposing God and opposing God's people. You can't handle the truth is from a famous film, but it's not so much that. It's whether they deserve the truth.
Yeah. Is that like the don't throw your pearls before pigs thing? Or that's a whole different... Because that's talking about judgment, isn't it?
That's also that's talking about the gospel in itself, and the gospel being trampled down by people who just keep rejecting it. And so therefore you're kind of, in a sense, devaluing the gospel by going back to the people who just constantly malign it and bust it. So therefore there's an element of judgment.
Where, for example, Rahab lies because she's stowing the spies away.
Yeah.
There's clearly two alternatives. Spies get captured and tortured and killed, or they get to be free. And the process of allowing them to be free requires a degree of deception. And there's the greater good argument that the lie saves lives, and lives are of a higher order. But there's also the argument that these people asking don't deserve the truth because they're hostile enemies who you're not in sort of covenant relationship with. But it doesn't mean you can lie to everyone who's not a Christian, just to be clear.
Yeah. And you're kind of, it's hard, isn't it? Because you don't want to say it's always in very, in warlike situations. Because I think there are situations where, we need to be wise. Another Israelite midwives, they lied, deceived Pharaoh.
Yeah, you're right. I think I've always thought, as Christians, we ought never tell a lie under any circumstances.
That is the reform. That would be the traditional reform position. That would be where someone like Augustine would have held. Someone like John Murray would have sat with that kind of view as well. But I think there is others, people like Charles Hodge and others, have started to distinguish that out a bit more.
I was thinking of, there's an anecdote I think it's in Corrie ten Boom's The Hiding Place. You probably know what I'm about to say. And I can't remember, I think it was maybe her sister so they were hiding some Jews in their house under, I think there was like a trapdoor in the floor, and they were hiding them under there, and there was a rug on top of it. And then the Nazis came, but I'm sure it was her sister who just had this conviction that she should not tell a lie. So when they said, "Where are they?" she kind of giggled and said they're under the rug. And in God's providence, they were like, "Oh, she's being stupid," and left and didn't check when truthfully they were under the rug. I guess it just shows that she thought she was being faithful, and actually God did protect those. But then there's like Rahab it's a similar situation, isn't it? But Rahab did deceive, and God honoured that, it seems.
Yeah. This is an exceptional thing, though. There's a whole load of areas where we do need to tell the truth.
Yeah, I'm not harbouring fugitives, so it's a bit, in my life it's a bit less extreme, or a lot less extreme.
I guess so. It could come into our situation now, thinking about what that might look like. So for example, if the government was to bring in laws regarding, I don't know, conversion therapy, band therapy, etc., and someone turned up on your door and said, "Are you teaching your children X, Y, Z?" That would, in a sense, be breaking the law. Would we at that point go, "No, I'm not," deceive, or would I say, "Yeah"? Do you know what I mean? Like there comes a marker, and I guess that what would we do in those situations?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know if my conscience would allow me to say, "No, I'm not teaching that," when I obviously am. But I don't know. Could you argue it either way, do you think?
Yeah. I think I could argue that either way.
You could. I think that. Yeah. But I could see I think my conscience would probably go more towards the testimony. But
yeah, you mean to tell the truth?
Yeah, but I could also see a sense whereby, hold on a second, if I was to tell the truth and this meant the removal of my children from my home, is that now fundamentally you go, well, you could say, well, I just trust the sovereignty of God and His purposes in there. But I could also see, well, in the sovereignty of God, actually, it's better that they stay with me and be under the influence of Christian teaching, which is better by far than being allowed to expose to the secular state. Does the state have the right to determine what I teach my children that is profoundly from God's truth? You could argue, well, no, they don't. Therefore, they don't have the right to know the truth of whether I am what I am doing in our home in a way. So I could see, and this is where I think it's helpful to have these conversations, because I think because we are naturally rightly inclined as believers to go, actually we speak truth, and we speak truth in love to one another, and we want to be modelling that, because absolutely we want to be modelling that, and we don't want to be looking like we're some kind of hidden cult. But I think we also got to learn to be wise. You know, think about believers in Iraq, Iran, and these kind of countries. They don't go around going, hey, I'm a Christian, because if they did, they're killed, the church is wiped out, they're unable to witness. So there is a level of deception and play that is at work that seems to me to be warranted by Scripture, because you're in a warlike zone. Your enemies are around. They're not therefore my neighbour who is seeking to do good. They're my enemy who is seeking to harm. Yeah.
Let's just backtrack a little bit and look at the commandment. So we're talking alike. The conversation is like the commandment is saying, do not lie. But it doesn't say, it says it's to do with this false testimony against your neighbour. So does this have those implications does this go broader to, is this speaking about lying, falsehoods in general, or is it this particular commandment only about that kind of law court setting or not telling untruths about a person?
No, I think with all the exceptions that we've talked about, I think it does, generally speaking, apply across all relationships and our speech. I think God hates lies. I think sin is bound up with lies. I think Satan is the father of lies.
Yeah.
I think God loves truth, and people have occasionally done good in the Bible by lying for the reasons that we've said, but have often done lots of harm by lying. So yeah, I think lying in all relationships is wrong, and truth is really important. It's godlike to speak in a way that corresponds with reality. There is another exception to do with withholding the truth sometimes, but that's a different exception as well, where we may choose not to answer something, but that's different to lying.
I refuse to answer on the grounds it may incriminate me.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I think it then comes down to how you define lie, though. You know, is lie is purposely deceiving in order to harm. It's different to a lie that is, you know, that's what I mean. Like in one sense, being clear on what we mean by lie, because one is Satan-like, and another is seeking to uphold. It's a deception or a falseness.
You'd need to be careful you weren't giving yourself a cop-out for all kinds of situations where you think, that might harm someone if I tell them their mother is terminally ill.
Sure.
You could say, well, I'm not harming anyone by withholding that truth.
Yeah, no, it's helpful.
But really, you would be harming them. They need to know that.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying. Quite so. But there are other things where you might think it's trivial. There's the so-called white lie. It doesn't get used so much these days, actually, because people lie in all kinds of contexts. But the so-called white lie, which is the completely harmless lie, which is trivial. You pretend you weren't somewhere or were somewhere or something for some convenience that doesn't really, in your mind, do any damage to that person. And I think those are probably harmful to the person in some way, in that you're not giving them the full truth, but they're also harmful for your attitude about truth. Yeah. Which means you start to hold it very lightly and think, well, if for convenience I will just lie, I will pretend to my wife, let's put it that way around, that I didn't prang the car, or I've got no idea what happened or something. Where you you're now escalating up to, you're not harming them by doing that, and you're going to deal with it perhaps, and you might say, well, it will just save me an argument. You're now starting to lie for convenience reasons and think, well, that's okay because it's not harming anyone, and then it becomes habitual. Yeah, I think. I haven't pranked the car, by the way, just to be clear.
Has anybody?
Well, I probably have. Has anyone pranked the car? My daughter's pranked the car a few times. So there's another safeguarding release of information.
Yeah, quite.
She's pranked my car. She should never be insured.
I'm not sure it's a safeguarding.
If anyone's listening, she's never be insured ever again.
Okay.
That could be more harmful. That could be more harmful to her. But
Is that not a false testimony against your daughter? That
yes, it is. She should be
especially
insured.
in a legal context.
Yeah. Stop writing that email. Actually, it's fine. She can be insured.
Excellent. Just in case your daughter's car insurer is listening.
She's only hit the wing mirror, I think.
So that hardly counts.
Yeah, but it's really expensive, the wing mirror.
Yeah.
But I think we can deceive ourselves a lot, and I think it's a sanctification thing. As in, when we become more self-aware and grow as Christians, we, in a good way, become quite precious about the truth.
Yeah.
I think if we're not from a Christian background of family, we hold it very lightly. And
I've really experienced that actually with friends who are not Christians, that just minor things they will just say, and I'm like, that's just not true. Like, you find out something's not true, and there's no really implications of it, but it's just like, I can't believe you would just say something that's not true. But we do it as well.
Yeah.
But I think it's because we have that fundamental desire to be truthful, which then makes it harder when we get to those difficult ethical decisions, because you want to be truthful, which is why we find it therefore harder to then, to make those distinctions, which is a good thing. It's better that way round than, it doesn't matter, I can lie, whatever.
Yeah.
It's also a trust issue. I know this is a pragmatic argument, and I think the principled one is to do with God loving truth and so forth. But I think there's a pragmatic argument to do with trust as well. That we trust God because He keeps His promises. We want people to trust us because what we say we will do and what we say is true, and they don't find out later that we were lying and then lose trust. Trust in relationships is important. It's obviously important in close family relationships, husband and wife. Because you trust them about the car accident or the reason they forgot to go to the shops. You trust them when they say they're not having an affair. That there's a whole build of trust over the trivial through to the more and more important. And you still, once you start to deceive, it becomes habitual, I think.
Yeah, we Stuart and I just had a weekend away, and we were staying in this little hut. And they had some board games there. So we thought, let's play a board game. And we got one out, and there was the game Scruples. Have you ever played it?
No.
But we looked at, after we realised it was quite dated as well, we looked at it, was produced in the 80s. So it's all these question cards. It was like, what would you do in this situation? But actually, we read 2 or 3 cards, and we were like, as Christians, this game is very dull. Because it was all like, something, you prank someone's car, do you leave a note and tell them? Or like in a car park, like it was all that kind of thing, and we were like, yes, but it was just so interesting. I was like, if you're not Christians, this game's quite fun, because you'd be like, if I could get away with it, I wouldn't. But I think as Christians, with those kind of principles, the game was just very dull, because it was like, we know what the right thing to do is. So that was just.
But it could be good
funny.
for a discipleship class. Helping people to work out and discern what to do in the right decisions as a young believer.
Yeah, maybe we should make like a Christian version. Actually, it'd be quite good with my kids if it was.
Yeah, there you go. Youth groups settings.
There we go. Tell the youth leader.
I like the game Cheat though,
where you have to say, "I'm laying down 2 2s or 5 3s." Yeah, it's never going to be 5.
But I think that's acceptable lying, because I think it's lying with a clear purpose of playing a game.
You have all entered into an agreement that there will be some deception in this.
Quite so.
Yeah.
Or poker or something.
But that, again, I think that's where it's not a lie, is it? Because everyone knows what's going on. There's no one being deceived by that, because everyone understands that's the nature. It's the same in any sporting event where you're kind of trying to, hide your tactics. You're not lying. It
is really endemic, though. Endemic might not be the word. I think it is. Where an epidemic's everywhere. That it's part of our sinful hearts. You will notice with your children, perhaps your children don't, but lying is very reflexive. It's a very common thing. You
really have to teach them not to. You never have to teach them to do it.
Absolutely. And it's normally for preservation, for getting out of a tricky situation. But, with my children and now grandchildren, lying is quite common. It's different. Some do it more than others just because of the way their character is made. But it's really common. And it's probably the more upsetting thing than the thing. If they've spilt their drink or they've eaten the chocolate they weren't supposed to, you're not that worried about that.
Yeah.
You're much more upset because they've betrayed you by not saying. Why are you laughing, Mark?
No, I was just thinking
because you ate the chocolate.
No, it's a phrase, isn't it? That you know, tell the truth and shame the devil. You know, that,
I've never heard that. I quite like it.
I've never heard it either.
There you go.
I might whip that one out next time. They claim they've brushed their teeth, and I know they haven't.
One of my wife's grandparents.
One of your wives?
Grandparents. One of my wife's grandparents.
You have to have the whole sentence.
Sorry, yes. Yeah. Don't jump to conclusions. One of my wife's grandparents is better than one of my wife's.
Wives.
Oh, my grandparents? Yeah.
It depends where the apostrophe is, doesn't it?
Yes, quite so.
Okay, I only have one wife.
Great.
She had, numerous grandparents.
That was one of the other commandments, so we dealt with that one.
Yeah, we have, yeah. Can we just talk a little bit more about these kind of lies that we might just, in our normal life, want to say? Like, somebody says, how's my outfit? So your wife says, oh, what do you think of my new dress? And you hate it. Should you tell her? Or somebody says, oh, have you got any plans tonight? And they're going to invite you out and you really don't want to go. Like, these kind of things. Should you absolutely tell the truth? Or is it all right to have a bit of, oh, well, your smile's so lovely, and deflect? Or, what do you reckon about those kind of things?
I think deflecting's all right for some of those. But if you've been married a long time, you can't get away with it anyway. But yeah, I think the one about pretending you've got some other plans is a straightforward, harmful lie. So I'm not sure.
That's my biggest lie temptation in life, I think.
I'm not sure
to pretend I'm busy when I just want to stay at home.
If someone says, what's his outfit look like? It depends an awful lot on the relationship with them and quite how badly you feel about it. You might say, I'm not sure it suits you. I'm not sure.
I think you can. There are, like someone says, if my wife asks me, I'm going to tell her, because she wants me to tell her the truth. Yeah. I'm not loving her if the outfit looks terrible on her. Oh yeah, carry on, darling. You look great. When you don't, and she wants to know the truth. So, but if someone else was kind of, you may just go, I'm not going to comment. I'm not going to get involved in that. Make a jest of it. I think that's okay. Yeah. And I think in terms of, we just need to speak. If I don't want to go out, let's just say, actually, I'm having a quiet one in tonight. I just need to rest up and
as for the next 10 years.
Sure. But it may mean that I need to think about, why am I so antisocial if I don't want to go out for 10 years with those people? Are they really my friends? I think it's probably raising other questions.
But then But say it is actually, I just don't want to hang out with those people. Then what's the answer? You can't say, actually, I just don't want to spend time with you. Like, that's not okay to say that, I don't think.
Sure.
No, I think...
I'm not sure.
I think you've got to work out your reasons why you're not wanting to, and what it means, therefore, to love, particularly as believers. Why would I not want to move towards them?
Not wanting to spend time with you is quite different to saying, I am just socialised out. I just can't cope with another evening out, which is, I think, reasonable, as long as it's true. I think, by the way, there are other things like, in our context, which won't be most people listening, but if someone's done a sermon and it's a bit average, and they say, well, what do you think? You're not going to say everything necessarily you think about it, because it can be quite crushing and harmful. You're not going to say anything false, like, I thought it was the best sermon I ever heard. But you'll try and pick out some truths that were good about it, and then make some suggestions of things that perhaps were not so good. But if you genuinely felt, as you were listening to it, this is really not very good at all.
Do what Graham does. What did you think of it?
Sometimes I do that, and you to me. But,
as if he would say that. So if Mark had preached, Graham would say to Mark, "What Mark did you think of your sermon?" You mean that? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, because sometimes the person who's preached knows that it was a bit average or what was wrong about it. So then it kind of saves that awkwardness. But sometimes it's just not necessary to say it. So you're not lying by saying, you're not pretending, and being gushing about it. I think that is falsehood. But it's not lying to maybe not say everything that's in your head, which is true in marriage and everything else. If Caroline always knew everything that was in my head, that I thought about everything, it would be unbearable, I think. Way too many thoughts. And some are not helpful, but if you're asked a straight question, that's different. Where you have to.
I wonder whether I was just thinking, the area for us as well is the false testimony of how I present myself.
Yeah.
So trying to give off an impression of that I'm better than I am, or more knowledgeable. So I think it's so subtle, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's so quick to do. Like I was thinking, even in this podcast, I read something recently, this morning, and you're quoting it as if you're the guru. And there's a subtle temptation. There's a good motive when you're trying to be helpful, quoting others, but there's probably a subtlety where I'm trying to give an impression that I am more knowledgeable than I really am, or better read than I really am, rather than I've just read one book, but can talk about Augustine and these other guys, but I'm just quoting from other guys. You know what I mean? Like it's very subtle. So like even in this conversation, I'm thinking, hold on a second, why would I? Partly because you're just talking, but then you reflect after, you think, well, actually, partly you're trying to give off. And I think that's where we're very much more subtle in terms of how we present now. And this is where it's really hard, because there's mixed motives. You are doing different things, but I think sometimes we get caught up in trying to present that we're better than we are. I could have gone. Actually, I was reading this morning. And then people would, that, and I read that actually this was a historic, rather than giving the impression that I had this knowledge that I hadn't.
You've read the whole collected works of Augustine and memorised them.
Exactly, that you're wider read than you had. And it was interesting, just even there. There's very little example just in this podcast, just how quick we are to want to subtly give better impressions.
Yeah.
I was impressed with your knowledge of Augustine.
Well, there you go. And I don't have it.
But I know you, so I wasn't too impressed.
Yeah, but it's interesting. You read one book, and I should have said actually what had happened. So I'm sorry, but but I think it's an interesting.
Yeah.
The false testimony comes in that way as well.
Yeah, it's easily done, isn't it? Like again with books, somebody can mention a book, and I can smile and be like, oh yeah, and then the conversation goes further, and I realise I'm really giving the impression that I know this book, I've read it, and I haven't. And at some point you need to say, actually, I haven't read it. Or do you just go on and, there are those calls to make, aren't there?
Yeah, but I think this is where it's working our hearts, isn't it? What am I doing in that moment? Why do I not want to just say, actually, I've heard of it, but I've not read it.
Yeah. Which is fine. Nobody's read all the books in the world.
Right. But it is so that's where I think the false and I think it's even more dangerous with the social media world, because you put out a very quick text on something, or a tweet, or whatever you do on Instagram or Snap, whatever it is, which gives the impression that you are better, more knowledgeable than perhaps you are, because people are just getting a snapshot of something. Rather than, I do think you see a lot of that. Guys speaking on stuff that, why are they? Because they want to look.
Yeah.
And I think it is this false testimony arena. It's a false witness.
Yeah. Yeah. Before we close, can we just touch on gossip a little bit, which I think probably kind of falls into this category a bit. Obviously, well, from our discussion, to outrightly say something's untrue about somebody to somebody else, that is wrong. What about the situation, something is true, is that still wrong to, or does this just not fall into this commandment? Is that just a whole separate issue?
I think it's connected, because I think the gossip family of words connects with slander as well. So they're all kind of in the often used sometimes even as synonyms, and you think, oh, I thought slander was different. But so it can be that the thing you're saying is true but very damaging to the person, or partly true but you're exaggerating, so you're slandering them by exaggerating the kind of half truth you've got. So I think it is very related to actually telling falsehoods. But I think a bit like Mark was saying about presenting the false impression of yourself, gossip is often to do with presenting an impression of yourself. It's often to do with wanting to harm somebody else with the truth. And it's often something that's been shared confidentially. So I think there's heart motives, but there's also what is the thing you're sharing and what is the effect of the sharing the thing you're sharing, which you need to think about. But yeah, they're definitely related. And
I mean, Proverbs talks
gossip
about
is clearly
like
a thing.
choice morsels. Proverbs talks about it as kind of those choice morsels, and it's often I'm just wanting to talk about it because there's no real reason, but I just love to be able to present that kind of information, or because actually I just enjoy talking about someone else's life rather than my life.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just a form of deflection as well, isn't it? You know, like I'd rather be talking about them than have to be talking about what's going on inside me. And also, often it makes me feel better about myself. Look how terrible they are. Look what they're doing. Can't believe they've done that. And we get this sense of, well, actually, you know, I'm doing all right.
Yeah, and that is presenting a false presentation of somebody else as well as of yourself.
And we can attribute motives and character to people by the way we describe an event.
Yeah.
So we're not even just saying they did that. We're embellishing the story a little bit, but we're also kind of there's a whole load of freight that comes with it, which is saying this is a bad person who always does this kind of thing, which may not be true. So it may be slandering them in that sense. It may be that they are a person who's habitually doing that thing. But yeah, it's always an area for lots of careful thought.
Yeah. So what's the answer? How can we seek to obey this commandment then? Is that the answer? Careful thought. Is that what it boils down to, do you think?
I think it's having a really good reason to not speak in ways that correspond with reality. Yeah. And the really careful thought is all those exceptions we spoke about at the beginning and a little bit later on. Those are more exceptional. So in our everyday lives, consciously loving the truth.
Yeah, great. That's a good note to end on, I think. You've been listening to Ordinary, the podcast seeking to help ordinary Christians live for Christ in everyday life. If you found this helpful, please do share with a friend. Come and find us on social media. We'd love to have you join our conversations. You can find us on Twitter @OrdinaryCCHH, on Instagram @OfficialOrdinaryPodcast, and on YouTube @OrdPod, that's ORDPOD. Or you can email your comments or questions to ordinary@cchh.org.uk. We'll see you next time.